Imagine walking through a field one morning. The flowers are blooming, the air is warm, birds are singing, but something feels strangely different. You look closer at a sunflower. A real bee lands on it, then another, and just above them, almost impossible to see, a tiny robotic bee flies silently from flower to flower. It isn't here to replace the real bees. It isn't here to take over nature. It's here to help them. And that raises a fascinating question. Could tiny robotic bees one day help real insects rebuild ecosystems that humans have damaged? It sounds like science fiction, but researchers are already exploring miniature flying robots, robotic insects, artificial pollination, swarm robotics, and technologies designed to work alongside nature. And if these ideas ever become practical, the future of pollination could look completely different. Because the goal wouldn't simply be to build millions of robotic bees. The real dream could be something much more ambitious, to create a partnership between machines and nature, a future where technology doesn't replace the bee, but gives the bee a second chance. For millions of years, pollinating insects have performed one of the most important jobs on Earth. They move pollen from flower to flower. That simple movement allows plants to reproduce. And plants, in turn, support entire food webs. Fruits, seeds, nuts, wildflowers, forests, agricultural crops. Even animals that never come into contact with the bee ultimately depend on the plants that pollinators help sustain. But pollinators face enormous pressure. Habitat loss, pesticides, disease, climate change, extreme weather, and the disappearance of wildflowers can make it harder for insects to find food throughout the year. That's where the idea of robotic pollinators becomes so intriguing. What if technology could temporarily fill some of the gaps? Not by replacing natural pollinators, but by helping ecosystems recover. Think of it like scaffolding around a damaged building. The scaffolding isn't the building. Its job is to support the structure while the real building is repaired. Tiny robotic bees could theoretically play a similar role. They could operate in places where natural pollination has become difficult, while real insects slowly rebuild their populations. And that changes the question. Instead of asking, can robots replace bees? We could ask, can robots help bees survive? Now, imagine a future conservation project. A huge meadow has been damaged by drought and habitat destruction. The number of wild pollinators has fallen. Scientists begin restoring native flowers. They plant thousands of species, selected to bloom at different times of the year. They create nesting areas. They reduce pesticide exposure. And then they introduce another tool, a swarm of tiny robotic pollination drones. These machines are incredibly small. They might use miniature cameras, sensors, navigation systems, and artificial intelligence to recognize flowers. Instead of randomly flying around, they could potentially map the landscape. One robot finds a flowering patch. Another follows. A third identifies which flowers are producing pollen. The swarm communicates. Together, the machines create a constantly changing map of the ecosystem. And here's where things get really interesting. The robots wouldn't necessarily need to pollinate every flower. Their most important job could be identifying where help is needed. Imagine one section of the meadow suddenly losing natural pollinator activity. The robotic swarm detects the change. It alerts researchers. Scientists discover that the area has lost an important food source. They plant more native flowers. Weeks later, real bees begin returning. The robots gradually become less necessary, and eventually, they disappear. That's the kind of future that could turn robotic pollination from a replacement technology into a conservation technology. But there's another possibility. What if the robots could learn from real insects? A bee doesn't carry a GPS device. It doesn't have a giant computer, yet it can navigate an incredibly complicated environment. It can find flowers, avoid obstacles, return to its colony, respond to changing conditions. And somehow, this tiny creature performs all of this using a brain that is extraordinarily small. Scientists studying insect intelligence have already been inspired by these abilities. This is one reason swarm robotics is so fascinating. Instead of building one giant machine with enormous computing power, Researchers can study how many simple individuals cooperate. One robot might not be impressive. 1,000 cooperating robots could be completely different. And nature has already been doing something similar for millions of years. Ant colonies, bee colonies, termite colonies, bird flocks, fish schools. There isn't always one leader controlling everything. Instead, complex behavior can emerge from many simple interactions. A future robotic pollination system could potentially borrow that principle. Each tiny machine doesn't need to understand the entire ecosystem. It only needs to understand its immediate environment. Find a flower, avoid an obstacle, locate pollen, return to a charging station, share information, repeat. From thousands of tiny decisions, a much larger system could emerge. And then there is the emotional part of this story. Because imagine seeing a real bee return to a landscape that had almost lost it. At first, there might be only one, then 5, then 50, then thousands. The robotic bees would be flying around them, quietly supporting the recovery. But eventually, something beautiful could happen. The real bees wouldn't need the robots anymore. The flowers would be abundant. The nesting sites would be restored. The natural pollinators would once again dominate the sky. And the robotic swarm could retreat. That would be a very different definition of technological success. Not becoming indispensable, but becoming unnecessary. Of course, there are enormous challenges. Tiny flying robots are extremely difficult to build. The smaller a machine becomes, the harder it can be to fit batteries, motors, sensors, computers, and communication systems inside it. Energy is another major problem. A bee can fly using biological machinery that evolved over millions of years. A tiny robot has to carry its own power system. And if a machine is too heavy, it may not be able to fly efficiently. Then there's the question of navigation. A real flower meadow is chaotic. Wind changes, branches move, flowers sway, insects collide, light changes throughout the day. A robotic bee would have to function in an environment that is anything but predictable. And perhaps the biggest challenge of all is scale. There are enormous numbers of pollinating insects in nature. Replacing that activity with machines would be incredibly difficult. So the technology would have to be used strategically, perhaps only in damaged ecosystems, perhaps only during certain seasons, perhaps only to support endangered plant species. Or perhaps the robots would serve as scientific tools rather than full-time pollinators. The technology doesn't have to do everything. It only has to do enough to make a difference. And there is another question we can't ignore. What happens when robots enter an ecosystem? Nature is complicated. A machine designed to help one species could accidentally affect another. A swarm could interfere with insects. Robots could become waste if they break down. Materials could enter the environment. And if artificial intelligence controls large numbers of machines, researchers would need to make sure those systems behave predictably. This means the future of robotic bees wouldn't simply be an engineering challenge. It would be an ecological challenge. Scientists would need to understand not only how to build the machines, but how to make them coexist with living organisms. The safest approach might be to design robots with one central principle: help the ecosystem become independent of the robots. Now imagine this technology becoming even more advanced. The robotic bees don't simply fly. They can collect environmental data: temperature, humidity, flower health, pollen availability, air quality, plant diversity, pollinator activity. Suddenly, every robotic bee becomes a tiny environmental scientist. A swarm could explore an enormous field and create a detailed ecological map. Researchers could discover which plants are struggling, which areas are losing pollinators, which flowers bloom first, which species provide food during periods when other flowers disappear. And this information could help humans restore ecosystems much more intelligently. Instead of simply planting flowers and hoping for the best, we could understand exactly what an ecosystem needs. The robotic bees would become the eyes and ears of conservation teams, and the real insects would remain the stars of the story. There could even be applications beyond agriculture. Imagine a forest recovering after a wildfire. Native plants begin returning. but pollinator populations are slow to recover. Tiny autonomous drones could monitor flowering areas and identify which plants need assistance. Or imagine an island where a rare plant has only a few surviving populations. Robotic pollinators could potentially provide targeted assistance while conservationists rebuild the surrounding ecosystem. Or imagine a greenhouse on a future space habitat. There are no natural bees, no wild insects, but plants still need pollination. Tiny robotic insects could move between flowers, helping produce food in an artificial ecosystem. In that environment, the robotic bee wouldn't be pretending to be nature. It would be helping humans create a tiny version of nature where natural pollinators cannot exist. But perhaps the most exciting possibility is that this technology could change how we think about robots. For decades, we've imagined robots as machines that replace humans. Factories, warehouses, cars, construction. But ecological robotics suggests something different. Robots could become partners in natural systems. Machines could monitor forests. Underwater robots could restore coral reefs. Drones could plant vegetation. Tiny robots could study insects. And robotic pollinators could potentially support damaged ecosystems. The future might not be humans versus nature, or machines versus nature. It could be humans building machines that help nature repair itself. Still, we should be careful. The idea of a robotic bee swarm rebuilding the planet is exciting. But today's technology is nowhere near a world where billions of tiny robots can independently replace natural pollination. There are major scientific, engineering, economic, and ecological barriers. And that's important to understand. Because the real solution to declining pollinators probably isn't millions of robots. It's healthier ecosystems, more habitat, fewer harmful chemicals, greater plant diversity, better land management, and protection for the insects that already know exactly how to do this job. Robotic bees, if they become practical, should probably be considered a backup, not the foundation, because nature already built an extraordinary pollination system. We don't need to invent a better bee. We need to give the real bees a better world. And perhaps that's why this idea is so powerful. Picture that future meadow again. The sun is rising. Flowers stretch across the landscape. A real honeybee moves from a purple flower to a yellow one. Another disappears into the grass. Butterflies move through the air. Birds search for insects. And somewhere above them, almost unnoticed, a tiny robotic bee flies quietly between the flowers. It isn't the hero. It isn't the future replacing the past. It's simply there to help. Until one day, the machines stop flying because they aren't needed anymore. The ecosystem has recovered. The real insects have returned. The flowers are thriving. And the robots have finally accomplished the most important thing they were designed to do: make themselves unnecessary. Maybe that's what a true technological breakthrough should look like. Not a world where machines take nature's place, but a world where technology helps nature find its way back. And if that future ever arrives, the smallest robots on Earth might help create something enormous. A second chance for the creatures that keep our planet blooming. If you found this vision of the future fascinating, subscribe for more stories about robotics, artificial intelligence, future technology, tiny robots, environmental technology, and the inventions that could change our planet.